Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. Tonight is September 26, 2015. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. We're going to talk about a number of different things tonight. Last week I alluded to the situation in Japan. We'll try to round that up briefly here at the beginning of the show. We're also going to talk about the book that I just released regarding Hillary Clinton. We're going to, of course, focus on the situation in Syria and how that relates to the world geopolitical consideration, because things are heating up in Syria now, and it points toward the potential for a clash between Russia and Chinese forces versus the United States and NATO forces on the ground there in Syria. So, very dangerous situation. We're going to talk a lot about that. And, of course, ISIS czar Allen stepping down. Some good news, actually, coming from the Syrian front as well. And we're also going to talk a little bit about perhaps the Uyghur situation, if we can. And last week I mentioned that I wanted to talk about the Republican debates, the clown show, and I didn't get around to it. So perhaps we'll just have some brief commentary on that. Now, for those of you who are just joining us tonight for the first time, you can catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and every Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here at UCY.TV. The show is rebroadcast every night on UCY.TV. It's also rebroadcast on Reality Bites Radio. And you can check the UCY page for the schedule. Just go to the UCY homepage, click on the show schedule, pick the day, and and look for my show. You'll find it. If you want to find the show's personal page, it's ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And on that page, you'll find the YouTube videos, the archive versions of this show, and all the links to my more recent articles there on the page. And, of course, if you're interested in following my articles, then activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, theantimedia.org. I write for all these sites regularly and others. But if you're interested in my work specifically, then, of course, I would encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com, and that is the website where I repost all of my articles, all the YouTube videos, all the archive versions of this show. That is the website where I have links to my books. You can buy the books. You can also go look at the events page to see if I'm about to be speaking anywhere or taking part in any events. Links to the radio show are there as well. The About section, the bio, and the contact information is there. And, of course, a new store is there at the website also. Now, I've been plugging the website at the beginning of each show for the last few weeks because we've made a number of additions. And you can go to brandonturbeville.com to see those additions. A lot more information is available there. And, of course, I just mentioned the store. We just added that. Right now, on September 25th, there's only one book in it. That's mine. And we're gonna update that. Eventually, that's going to be kind of a one-stop shop for people who are interested in good information. So we're going to have my books in the store. You can find my books on the website anyway, but we're going to have my books in the store and also books from other researchers, and you'll be able to purchase those through Amazon. And if you want to support me, then I would encourage you, please, go buy those books from my store. And, of course, buying my books helps as well. But we're going to soon add an Amazon link. And this will be a link that if you click on it before you add something to your cart on Amazon, I'll make a small commission. So if you want to support me with, at no cost to yourself, that will be a good way. And, of course, we'll put that up on the website so you can just click on it, go to Amazon, and then add your item to your cart. It will not raise your price for anything. You can order a $50 piece of merchandise, and it won't cost you a cent over $50 to support me. I will get a commission off of it nonetheless. So we'll have that up on the website, and that's one way you could support me without spending money directly to me. So if you want to do that. So the website also, we have the free PDF of The Difference It Makes, 36 Reasons Why Hillary Clinton Should Never Be President, available on the website. Click on it and you can read that book for free. You can also find it on Amazon Kindle for 99 cents, and you can find it at in my bookstore. You can go to thebookpatch.com and check their bookstore, and you can purchase that book as well there. And of course, we're going to soon update the way we merchandise and distribute these books. So that's going to be another improvement coming to the website. And soon, we hope to continue adding little improvements here and there to the website. We hope to get this sort of really taken care of, really updated and really improved to the point that we are satisfied with it. And then there are some things that we want to launch, right? So be prepared, to all the listeners out there, be prepared for some type of action pretty soon. And this will involve you in your local area, right? This will involve you in your state. And this is something that can be done, right? This is something that you can do. It involves you being a leader in your area. And maybe it'll require a little bit of work, but I think people can get this done, and we're going to continue getting this information out and doing what we do here. But again, in the coming months, be prepared for some type of call to action, because the window of opportunity that we have is getting very, very close to being closed, and we can't allow that to happen. Now, let's just mention the Japanese war bill that was passed. The Japanese Constitution after World War II, after the Japanese defeat in World War II, had some constitutional constraints on the use of the Japanese military. In other words, it made imperialism illegal. It required that the Japanese military only be used in cases of self-defense, and hence the term self-defense army for the Japanese nation. Now, the Constitution was signed as a result of all of the mayhem that occurred during World War II, and it was generally Article 4, I believe, of the Japanese Constitution that prevented the military from being used for Article 9. Article 9. That's what provided much of the basis for that prohibition on aggressive military force. And it says, quote, "The Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes." In other words, the military cannot be used for anything other than self-defense. It can't be used for imperialism. It can't be used to just join alliances with the United States or with some other country that's marching across the world and destroying civilization. It can't be used to under the shadowy terms of protecting national interests, which we know has been used by the United States many times over. Protecting national interests really just also means imperialism. Very broad term. So the Japanese Constitution prevented that from taking place. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, however, the famous proponent of Abenomics, which has worked so well for the Japanese people that their economy now, after years and years and years of depression, is still in a depression, and it seems to be getting worse. So that's his success level. But of course now we're turning to war. And the danger here, and a lot of the Japanese people are concerned, and rightly they should be, because this is a legitimate issue, is that they're concerned that the Japanese military will now be used not just necessarily for imperialism to push across the globe, but as a tool of the United States to be used against China. And of course there are serious issues regarding the Senkaku Islands in Japan, or the Chinese would call it the Daiwa Islands. Regardless, this is a situation in which there is the potential for conflict between China and Japan, and this would be catastrophic. This would be horrible. We do not want to see a confrontation in this way, but the United States, of course, will push anybody into war anywhere, because that's something apparently the United States can never get enough of. And of course we know this would suit geopolitical concerns to help break the back of China in Asia, to use Japan against China, and have Japan sort of as a forward operating base there in Asia. And of course, we have to say that China is in this debate over these islands. These rocks in the ocean should not be a cause for war. We call on both the Japanese government and the Chinese government to act reasonably here and stop provoking one another over rocks in the water. Some type of agreement must come to the fore here and be signed somehow. We will say that China has acted somewhat provocatively in Asia in terms of the seas anyway. This does not justify what the United States has done, which is provoke and prod and push. But we have to admit, we have to say what's what in order to get the bottom of these things. The Chinese have indeed acted provocatively. Now creating these man-made atolls out in the ocean. To stand against the United States and American imperialism does not mean that you have to accept everything that every other country across the world does as justified and correct. I think that's the problem that a lot of alternative media outlets have also, is to have knee-jerk reactions to say, oh, well, the United States is marching across the globe killing people left and right, so anything that China does is acceptable. Or anything that Russia does is acceptable, and that's not the perspective that we have here on this show. It is to call out what you see, and that's what we're doing. So China has acted provocatively, but we're focusing on Japan right now, and this again, the United States has certainly provoked China on a number of fronts. Africa, for instance, where the United States is trying to push China out of places in Nigeria. In Kenya as well, and many other places in Africa. And of course, the use of terrorism in Southeast Asia is continuing right up to China's borders. Lots of that stuff going on. But the Japanese situation specifically has brought out hundreds of thousands of protesters into the streets of Japan. Abe and his government attempted to pass these security bills, or they didn't attempt to pass it. They did pass it. Abe and his government. And essentially what these security bills did was allow the Japanese military to be used for things other than self-defense, to come to the rescue of the United States, or to be used to defend national interests. And hundreds of thousands of Japanese people were out in the streets opposing this bill. And let me see if I can get you a quote here from one of the protesters, and I'll flesh this out in a second. There is Miki Tsukamoto. She's a working mother with a 4-year-old, and this is what she told the news reporters who were out there interviewing her. She says, "Everyone's life is important. I think members of the self-defense forces will quit. Maybe the only way to get troops will be a draft, and if not by force, there will be a sort of economic draft in which the less fortunate are lured by promise of economic rewards for service. We're becoming like America. That's frightening." End quote. Well, she's very astute. They are becoming like America, and it is frightening. And it might surprise many people, but the image of the United States across the world is quite frightening. It's puzzling and frightening. In one sense, we have this image spread across the world that America's the richest country on the face of the earth, and that in some sense we're all laying about eating grapes. And the other sense is this evil, destructive, horrible force of war and destabilization. It's akin to what you would have seen against Germany in the 1940s, just marching across the globe, slaughtering people, torturing people, and destroying civilization wherever it goes. And the other sense is this weird, decadent place of sex changes and transgender obsessions and political correctness, and all of this stuff is out there in the media, and people are not big fans of it. It might surprise many people that someone like Miss Tsukamoto here would not want to be the United States. But funny thing, not everybody loves the idea of having a horrible economy, an economic depression where people are dragged into the military by just a desire to be able to have some type of income, and then being sent across the globe to slaughter other people in the same situation. That's not something that maybe this woman or most Japanese people would like to be a part of. And of course, they have their own problems, absolutely. But they are a pacifist nation, and they haven't started a war with anybody since World War II. And you couldn't count on just two hands the amount of wars that the United States has started in the last 10 years. So that bill passed, and the overwhelming majority of constitutional scholars in Japan have agreed that bill is unconstitutional. But it doesn't matter because it passed, and showing that the same type of democracy exists in Japan as it does anywhere else. Now, let's move on. You can go to my website and you can see the articles regarding the Japanese protest, and you can see the videos, you can see the quotes and so forth there if you'd like. We need to turn to the Syrian situation, because that's the situation that seems to be heating up. Now, before we really get into the actual on-the-ground situation, we want to announce and celebrate the resignation of ISIS czar General John Allen, a real piece of trash who is now submitting his resignation as the special envoy to the coalition against Daesh. Well, good riddance. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, you piece of scum, you treasonous, worthless individual. You should be in prison, and we hope that one day those dreams are realized. But regardless, we have to be realistic. This is a resignation. He won't be in prison, and we'll see another individual put up in his place that exhibits the same level of psychopathy, sociopathy, and obedience to the world oligarchy that Allen represented. But still, it's nice to see these guys walking out of the door on occasion. So we've got reports on September the 22nd. The ISIS czar, John Allen, would be leaving his post within the next few weeks. And this information comes from Bloomberg View, from 4 separate administration officials who said that the White House was not ready to announce Allen's resignation officially, but that the general would be stepping down by early November, or in early November. We had Karen von Hippel, Allen's chief of staff. She's also going to be resigning, according to these reports. And again, we hope that nothing has been announced yet, but we hope that it's true. And Allen's, we should just mention Allen's reputation here. It's been marred by controversy and scandal in just the last few years. It's of course been part and parcel of a push to move the United States into further direct military conflict in Syria, particularly against the one fighting force that is actually opposed to ISIS, meaning the Syrian government. Now, after assuming command of the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan, John Allen was swept up in the David Petraeus-Paula Broadwell scandal, where his own communications with Jill Kelly, this Lebanese-American socialite, this Matahari, was possibly, his connections to her that possibly had connections to rival factions of the intelligence community networks, right? Kelly had these connections, allegedly, maybe. But Allen resigned from his command after this scandal, and then he retired from the military after this, the scandal was over. But he was brought back by Obama not even a year later, when he was named as the special presidential envoy for the global coalition against ISIL, and that's where he got the title as Obama's ISIS czar. Now, this is what Bloomberg View kind of sums up his view about war. It says, U.S. officials familiar with Allen's decision say he has been frustrated with White House micromanagement of the war and its failure to provide adequate resources to the fight. He unsuccessfully tried to convince the administration to allow U.S. tactical air control teams to deploy on the ground to help pick targets for airstrikes in Iraq. Allen also tried several times to convince the White House to agree to Turkish demands for a civilian protection zone in Syria, to no avail. Nonetheless, administration officials stressed that Allen's decision to leave his post was motivated mainly by the health of his wife, who suffers from an autoimmune disorder. Wasn't that the same resignation story that we heard when he was embroiled in controversy the first time? Well, let's just mention here, he was frustrated with White House micromanagement of the war. Well, what does that mean? We seem to be marching further to war, and that's what John Allen wanted to begin with. This seems to be a cover. He says he's unsuccessfully tried to convince the administration to allow U.S. tactical air control teams to deploy on the ground to help pick targets for airstrikes in Iraq. Well, that's really already there. We know that. The idea here is that there's already teams calling in airstrikes on the ground, special U.S. forces on the ground calling in airstrikes, not to hit ISIS, by the way. They're hitting infrastructure in Syria, and of course they are dropping supplies to ISIS, all by accident, of course. Now, he says he tried several times to convince the White House to agree to Turkish demands for a civilian protection zone. You got a civilian protection zone in Syria. We got this ISIL-free zone that exists there. So, regardless of all that, Allen's resignation comes at a very convenient time, right? The four-star general, he's a four-star general, is being implicated in the massaging of intelligence reports and even the bullying of intelligence analysts who might have produced reports that were contrary to Allen's war agenda. So, in this controversy, so we first had the Paula Broadwell, Jill Kelly controversy with Allen. Now we have the question of the falsified intelligence reports. This is the reason that Allen is resigning, by the way. It's not because of White House micromanagement or the failure to adequately fight ISIS. Allen supports ISIS. Allen has been supporting ISIS since the crisis began. It's not because of that. It's not because the White House is weak. All the Republicans go crazy when they hear that the White House is weak. Oh, yes, this is why we have to have Hitler in power and some Mussolini come in because Obama is weak, because to the Republican crowd, nuclear war is the only thing that proves that you're not weak. And we'll have something to say about that with Carly Fiorina shortly, and her obsession with nuclear war, and the fact that didn't cause consternation and hyperventilating throughout the American public. Instead, it was considered reasonable. That's extremely concerning. But back to Allen. Allen has supported ISIS since the beginning of the crisis in Syria, and ISIS, of course, al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, moderate rebels, it's all the same thing. The reason he's stepping down is not because of the White House perspective on the war. This is all just a cover story. He's stepping down because he got caught massaging intelligence reports and bullying intelligence analysts who produced reports that he didn't like, right? So Allen was not named specifically in some of these reports about the intelligence reports, but senior level leaders, including the Director of Intelligence and his deputy in CENTCOM, were indeed mentioned. And as ISIS czar, Allen was no doubt a member of this inner circle of high-level officials. It was connected to the military's relationship to ISIS and the public perception of the anti-ISIS military campaign. The question of Allen's involvement was raised at the State Department's daily press briefing on August 27th of this year, where they had spokesman John Kirby. He was forced to cut off the reporter's question and start groveling in admiration for Allen to try to cut off these questions. But of course, the implications are clearly that Allen was involved with this. When Allen, the Pentagon, the intelligence community, the White House, when they needed to present the war against ISIS as necessary, so they could fight these unbeatable supermen, the reports reflected the need to engage ISIS militarily. This is essentially what this is about. When they wanted to go to war with Assad under the cover of ISIS, they presented ISIS as undefeatable supermen, and we needed to go to war with them. When the military action began, the reports were used to represent U.S. military action of bombing Syrian civilian infrastructure as a success. So the manipulation of intelligence reports were really an exercising and manipulating of the perceptions of the general public and members of Congress who are generally so bewildered by their surroundings they're unable to make coherent decisions. So they were massaging these intelligence reports to make them say whatever they want, right? When they want to go to war with ISIS, they present the situation on the ground and say, this is something that's getting out of control. These guys are supermen. We have to go to war. Once they go to war, once they start bombing, then they can say, look, we're having success. We're defeating ISIS, even though they're not. They're supporting ISIS. But they can say they're defeating them to keep American support behind the operation. Now, we mentioned a second ago that Allen had pushed for greater U.S. military involvement in Syria, and he was one of the individuals who was implicated in negotiating with Turkey the creation of this ISIL free zone, which is really a no-fly zone by any other name. Allen has had veiled support for ISIS as a result of his crusade against the Syrian government in service of his oligarchical leaders. He's also supported these moderate rebels, meaning ISIS, and coordinating with countries who are also supporting terrorists. So this was part of the reason that there was this hashtag Fire Allen for ISIS campaign that began gaining steam on Twitter. And then we had, of course, I think that was initiated by Webster Tarpley, the Tax Wall Street Party, the United Front Against Austerity. They saw Allen as one of the main culprits behind this pro-ISIS stance, and particularly one of the most aggressive forces operating inside the American government. They even suggested that the creation of the ISIL free zone was really more of a stealth coup by Allen and the Petraeus clique against Obama. But regardless, the potential, regardless of the potential for back and forth between members of the American deep state, Allen is now stepping down from his official position. Now, this does not mean that the Anglo-American plot to destroy Bashar al-Assad is over, or even that it's losing steam. After all, members of the intelligence community often maintain their power after leaving their official government post. This development simply means that one operative of the assault against the Syrian people is retiring from his official capacity, right? It is not by any means a sign that the war on Syria is ending. It's a small positive step in the right direction, and of course we can only hope this small step is followed by a stampede. So what we would say to Obama is to request immediately the resignation of all of these generals who support ISIS, and what we would say to the American people is request the resignation of Obama and virtually anyone in Congress who has supported ISIS to begin with. That's a tall order, isn't it? But it's just an idea to mention that Allen is only one member of a very, very embedded deep state apparatus in the Pentagon. So while this, again, is a small step in the right direction, let's not blow it out of proportion and say that this is a huge setback for the war in Syria. There's plenty more of these people where this one came out of. Now, the question of the situation on the ground in Syria. Well, there is some good news. I'll tell you what. We've got time, so I'm going to go through some of the bad news first, right? We had the Russians now in Syria. That's not the bad news. But we had a situation in which Russian media has reported that Russian Marines who were stationed at the air base in Latakia have now been engaging ISIS fighters in direct combat. That's not the bad news, right? According to the Russian news site Sigodnia, ISIS militants attempted to ambush Russian soldiers stationed at this base, but they were fought off by the Russian Marines, with a number of ISIS fighters being killed and some of them being captured. Russian military activity, of course, has been increasing at the air base near Latakia over recent days, recent weeks, and they've had the arrival of new and advanced Russian fighter jets. I think the number is up to 28 now. And combat between Russian forces and ISIS militants are marking a drastic increase in the level of conflict in Syria, and it's adding an even greater international aspect to it as well. with Russia now openly providing the Assad government with missiles, with missile defense systems, with advisors, helicopters, satellite imagery, fighter jets. Some of those fighter jets are being flown by Russian pilots. Russians now stand in direct opposition to the United States pilots and their jet fighters and their special forces operatives on the ground in Syria. They're supporting the death squad, so the Russians are opposing them. The U.S. is supporting them, and we have the potential. We have proxy forces and direct military forces all operating in Syria for opposing sides. We are seeing the growing potential for direct military confrontation between the two major world powers, both of them armed with nuclear weapons, and that is very dangerous. If you don't understand the danger of that, then please go watch the movie from the 1980s called The Day After. It's a very good movie, and it shows you the lead up to a nuclear war, and more importantly, the results of a nuclear war. And if that doesn't convince you that this is not something that we should ever entertain, then I don't know what will. Now, of course, the biggest news, I think, is that in this situation, not necessarily that the Russian Marines had fought off the ISIS forces, but the big news is that according to Sigodnia, the ISIS fighters apparently had detailed plans of the base, as well as clear satellite imagery of the military installations that were on the base. So the question is, how did ISIS, a terrorist organization which has yet to launch its own satellites into space, how did they acquire such sensitive and important material? Well, I think we know how they got such sensitive and important material. It's because they were given satellite imagery. And the Russians certainly didn't give satellite imagery of its own base. So who did? Well, who's supporting ISIS? That's the United States. That's NATO. That's Israel. That's Saudi Arabia. And we can look and see at these intelligence apparatuses. We can see the governments that have been supporting ISIS. And we can see clearly who would have provided the satellite imagery. So is this a situation in which the United States or NATO or Israel, but particularly NATO, is this a situation in which they provided satellite imagery of a Russian base and gave it to terrorist proxies to attack the Russians as punishment for involvement in Syria? I personally think that that's the case, but that's, again, very, very dangerous because it's a launch of proxy forces against Russia, a nuclear state. This is very dangerous. Now, we've said that. If we want to mention also that there's been yet another increase in the level of tensions and international involvement in Syria. So the situation continues to heat up here. We've got a report coming from Leith Fadel, our friend from Syrian Perspective, who also writes from Al-Masdar News. And if this report is accurate, and his information has been corroborated repeatedly in the past, so he has credibility in our eyes. This report suggests that there's another troop deployment that's about to take place in Syria. In addition to the 2,000 Russian troops who were there earlier in the week, there is another troop deployment, but this time it's coming from China. And on September 23rd, we had Leith Fadel reporting from, again, Al-Masdar News. He reported that China has decided to commit troops and military aircraft to Syria within the next 6 weeks. Those reports have not been independently confirmed, but the outlet cited a senior Syrian officer in the Syrian military for these claims. And again, Fadel's information has been proven accurate many times in the past. There's no reason to doubt this, really. They do have connections, or not connections, but sources within the Syrian military. So I would not be as hesitant to believe these reports as I would as if it had come out on CNN, for instance, which is notorious for making up stories. So this is what's happening. On Tuesday morning, this past week, we had a Chinese naval vessel reportedly traveling through Egypt's Suez Canal to enter the Mediterranean Sea, but its destination was not confirmed. But again, according to that senior officer in the Syrian Arab army that's stationed inside the Syrian coastal city of Latakia, Chinese military personnel and aerial assets are scheduled to arrive in the coming weeks, and again, that's about 6 weeks, to the port city of Tartus, which is the Russian base, and he didn't provide any more detail on that. Now, Russia, of course, has made it abundantly clear that they're taking an active role in this conflict, but we shall see about these troops. Now, it's without doubt that if Assad were to ask China to engage ISIS in Syria, then China would be well within its rights under international law to do just that, since Assad is the internationally recognized government of Syria, and China would have been invited to enter the country militarily. The same with the Russians. So there's clearly a mutual threat between Syria and China, or shared between Syria and China, I should say. Both countries under attack from Uyghur terrorists. These Uyghur terrorists are typically controlled by Turkish and Western intelligence. We've got an article coming out on that soon. It hopefully will be up by the time you hear this show. If not, keep checking back at BrandonTurbeville.com. We're going to go into some detail about these Uyghurs. But so we've got Syria fighting Uyghur terrorists in Syria. We've got China fighting Uyghur terrorists, separatists, in Xinjiang. And we've also got recent bombings in Thailand, which has been attributed to Turkey's Uyghur Grey Wolves and a Turkestan Islamic Party or Army of Conquest, Turkish-backed terrorists at work in Syria, assisting in supplying Chinese Uyghur terrorists with fake passports and also engaging in terrorist and military operations against the Syrian government. All of that is a threat that is shared and exists, both to China and Syria. It's a threat to both of these countries, and this is part of the reason, I think, for Chinese involvement. Also because of the threat for NATO imperialism. But we have an article by Christina Lin from the Times of Israel. She says, some pundits may point to China's non-interference principle as an impasse to action. However, China's non-interference principle is more in reference to meddling in other countries' domestic politics, such as the U.S. Western penchant for intervention and violating other countries' sovereignty to overthrow autocratic regimes they dislike. Non-interference policy does not mean inaction when China's security and interests are threatened. It is not difficult for China to take action when its core interests are threatened. That means violation of its sovereignty, territorial integrity, economic development, and regime survival. At the 2011 IISS Asia Security Summit, Chinese Defense Minister Liang Grungli spelled out China's core interests as the following, quote, the core interests include anything related to sovereignty, stability, and form of government. China is now pursuing socialism. If there is any attempt to reject this path, it will touch upon China's core interests. Or if there is any attempt to encourage any part of China to secede, that also touches upon China's core interests related to our land, sea, or air. That anything is related to China's national economic and social development also touches upon China's core interest. End quote. And Lin continues, if the TIP continues to gain power within the army of conquest that is a jihadi witch's brew of various al-Qaeda affiliates and Salafist extremists, Xinjiang may become the next Afghanistan and follow the pattern of AFPAC, Syria, Iraq, with local militant forces cross-border havens attracting foreign fighters and enjoying material and diplomatic support from Turkey and other outside powers with shared ideology and interests. Moreover, the Assad regime is currently still the legal and UN-recognized government of Syria, despite only holding a third of its territory. If Assad asks and gives permission for Russia, China, and other SCO members to assist him militarily, that would be in accordance with international law. This differs from the current U.S.-led anti-ISIS coalition airstrikes in Syria that is neither operating under a UN mandate nor permission from the sovereign government, although it enjoys implicit permission to some extent from the Assad regime to fight ISIS. No, it doesn't. That's a face-saving move by Assad, because what is he going to do? Attack the U.S. Air Force? So that last part was not, I don't think, very accurate. But she also says, quote, with Erdogan waging an Islamist proxy war on China, Kurds, Assad, Sisi, Netanyahu via al-Qaeda affiliates Army of Conquest, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas. It is no wonder Syria and Egypt both applied to join the China-led SCO in June this year. Thus, Syria and China both share threats from the Army of Conquest that is attacking Assad and China's Xinjiang. Excuse me. So, we have, again, if Fadel's report from Al-Masdar is accurate, then it's apparent that the Russian-Chinese bloc is finally responding to the Western-backed terror threat that has come in many guises, but really is just a product of the NATO intelligence apparatus. So we need to be watching this closely. Now, this question of confrontation between the United States and Russia, and now, of course, with the involvement of China, this is all becoming greater by the day. But first, I guess I should mention the good news. Let's try to make a sort of a good news, bad news sandwich here. Use the old corporate structure. The Syrian military has had a major victory recently. With the assistance of the Syrian people, and of course, the Syrian military working with the Syrian people, the national defense forces and so forth, as well as the Iranians and Hezbollah, the new Russian involvement already beginning to produce results. We have these reports that the Syrian Army's 67th Brigade of the 18th Tank Division has captured the Palmyra T4 Air Base road. Now, might not seem like much to people listening, but the victory has come in close coordination with Hezbollah, the National Defense Forces, and Ba'ath battalions. Again, we've had sources reporting that the Syrian army now controls the entirety of that road from the outskirts of Palmyra all the way to the T4 Air Force Base. T4 has been under attack from jihadists for about 2 months, or actually over 2 months, but these attacks were successfully repelled by the Syrian military forces who were stationed at the base. Palmyra, of course, if you remember, is the city, this ancient city where all of these artifacts, again, the whole city was ancient, that, of course, the bearded monkeys came in and destroyed the artifacts. The guy who was the curator, the 80-year-old man who was the curator of these artifacts, was tortured and beheaded by the monkeys, and, of course, that was spread all across the news. Of course, another reason why the United States should bomb Assad, right? Because ISIS takes over Palmyra. Western-backed ISIS takes over Palmyra. We should bomb Assad, who's fighting Western-backed ISIS. All great logic. That was all over the news. But now, it was scarcely mentioned that most of the civilians had been evacuated from Palmyra by the Syrian government. Most of them left long before then. When they find out, generally, that the bearded monkeys are coming through their town, they get out and they run to the safe haven of the government-held areas. So that should tell you something. But the Syrian military did not immediately retake Palmyra. Lots of people were confused about that. Well, of course, they didn't, because militarily, it's not strategic. It's really not that strategic. Now, for culture, it's extremely important. But at this point, the Syrian military is not concerned with culture. They're concerned with survival. And so this has been left. But this recent takeover of the road leading from Palmyra to the T4 Air Base cuts off yet another line of communication, a line of supply to Palmyra, to the death squads, to the terrorists. So I'll explain the importance of that in a second. But we now have the Syrian military and Lebanese resistance forces being positioned on the outskirts of Palmyra, and that was after they were successful at seizing the hilltop at Tal Syria Tel, which is west of Palmyra, and it's also at the western outskirts of the Kasyon Mountains. All right, so we got sources saying that the Syrian army unit known as the Tiger Forces are making their way to the northern outskirts of Palmyra after they captured the Jazal Mountains and the oil fields in that area from the terrorists about a week ago. So it was my own sources that had reported to me that the plan of the Assad government was to encircle Palmyra before launching a counterattack so they could eventually retake the city. And that's been the case with the Syrian military's tactics over the past few years, right? Where they would attempt to do this to lessen the loss of life. They would evacuate the citizens before the bearded monkeys invaded, and then they would respond in a surgical fashion, right? They would either surround the area, they'd make a major push, or if there were still plenty of civilians, they would do this in a surgical fashion to lessen the loss of life. And now we've got Syrian forces in the north and the west of Palmyra. It appears that we see these efforts to liberate the city are being put in place. The retaking of Palmyra, okay, it would be a victory for the Syrian people and the Syrian government in terms of territorial gains, absolutely. It would, I think, more importantly, remove a major propaganda piece from this Western puzzle of false narratives, right? The ISIS takeover of Palmyra, with the murder of civilians, the destruction of the cities, artifacts, that's been used as a terror mechanism by the Western media for the purpose of frightening us, the Western population, and ginning up the case for U.S. military involvement in Syria. If the victory in Palmyra, as many are suggesting, is the product of the recent Russian involvement in Syria, then Palmyra might soon be liberated by the Syrian military. And it might be the first of many more Syrian military victories to come. In other words, it would rip this propaganda piece away from the United States, but it would also give a shot in the arm to the Syrian people. I've got sources in Syria that I talk to regularly, and the situation is already getting better in Syria, now that the Russians are there. The Russians have launched significant, important bombing campaigns already. Actually, it's funny what can happen when you actually bomb ISIS. The United States has been at this for what? Several months, right? Maybe, I think they may have been at this a year. I don't know, time gets away. There's so many wars. But how long has the United States been bombing ISIS in Syria and Iraq? And they just keep getting stronger. We just can't explain it. They just keep getting stronger. We have to massage intelligence reports. Well, the Russians have been in there, what, a week and a half? And they're already, the situation is getting better in Syria. It's funny what can happen when you actually bomb your target. What have I been telling you this whole time? The United States is not bombing ISIS. They are dropping supplies to ISIS. The United States is not bombing ISIS. They are bombing Syrian infrastructure. They're bombing grain silos, food storage areas, oil fields, and that sort of thing. Oil refineries. That's what they're bombing. So it's very, very interesting there. Now, let's turn to, again, now we are getting pressed for time. I want to mention the tension between Russia and the United States in Syria, foreshadowing the some type of major confrontation, right? And I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm not trying to promote fear porn here, but the Syrian crisis with the Russian forces on the ground in Syria, bombing inside Syria. We've got the United States bombing inside Syria, special forces inside Syria, and of course there's proxy forces. You could say the terrorists are the proxy forces, and although the Assad government is not a proxy force for Russia, there is this element of cooperation. So we can say Assad versus ISIS, Russia versus U.S., and that's sort of different terminology. So if you see that on the ground, the potential for somebody to fire, a NATO plane to fire on a Russian plane or an Israeli plane, they'll do anything. Always ready to fight and die to the last American. To hit a Russian plane, a missile from NATO or Israel to hit a Russian plane, special forces confrontations, U.S. special forces begin killing Russian special forces or vice versa in the midst of a fight. All of this could lead us to a serious confrontation. And I don't mean a proxy confrontation. I don't mean U.S. forces fighting Russian forces in Syria. Of course, that could happen. I mean a direct military confrontation, not only in the Middle East, not only in Asia, but in Europe. And if you have a confrontation in Europe, well, you are leading us down the road to World War III, and it's not a very long road. Once you get this confrontation going directly, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in Asia, whether it's in anywhere else, you are leading us to nuclear war, and that is not a good situation to be in, because it's very difficult to pull back if you get this ball rolling, especially in Europe. This is probably the most dangerous powder keg. The Syrian situation is frightening in the situation that it in the sense that it points us to it could push the European situation to light up, and that's extremely dangerous, as I've said. So the Western-backed plot to overthrow Assad is placing the world in a precarious position, and I don't want anybody to mistake what I'm saying here. Again, it's the Western-backed plot to overthrow Assad that puts us in a precarious position. It's not Russian aggression. It's NATO aggression. It's American aggression. Always remember that. If we are plunged into a nuclear holocaust, if you're around to remember this situation, you can know who's responsible here. That's what this whole situation was created by Western involvement in Syria, Western involvement in Ukraine. The Russians didn't start this. So bear that in mind. But if the general public of Russia and the West are not really aware of the dangers of further meddling in the Middle East by the U.S. and NATO, we know that the state actors of the United States and Russia are clearly aware of the potential ramifications. It can't go without mentioning that the entire confrontation is, again, the creation of the West. We've got military chess pieces being set all across the world. We had Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov stating that the United States should engage in bilateral military-to-military communication with Russia over military operations in Syria so they can avoid unintended consequences. Now, Lavrov didn't spell out exactly what he meant by unintended consequences, but his meaning was clear. Unintended consequences are a direct military confrontation between the United States, NATO, and Russian forces. Lavrov says, "We are always in favor of military people talking to each other in a professional way. They understand each other very well. If, as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has said many times, the United States wants those channels frozen, then be our guest." So, the Western media pounced on these statements like it was a threat to the United States. But this statement made by Lavrov was in the course of explaining the importance of military-to-military communication so to avoid incidents in the course of simultaneous operations on the same field. In other words, it was not a threat, it was a cautionary warning. But his words do address a very real possibility of direct military confrontation between Russian and American forces in the skies or on the ground in Syria. And I mentioned this in my article, Are Russians Sending Military Support to Syria? Potential Conflict with NATO, that while a Russian military presence in the Syrian capital would undoubtedly provide an important boost to the Syrian military's battle against ISIS and other Western-backed terrorists, and it has, it will also provide the world with the potential for direct military confrontation between these two major powers, both of them armed with nuclear weapons. And again, we're not saying, oh, the Russians should pull back because they're putting us at the brink of war. No. We want the Russians to support the Syrian government. We want the Russians in Syria to destroy ISIS. We have no problem with that. Go Russia. But the group putting us at the brink of nuclear war is the West. It's NATO. Russia has acted only in self-defense. Russia is acting on behest of the Syrian government and their own geopolitical interests. And again, geopolitical interests, sure, but ISIS needs to be dealt with. And, of course, the people supporting ISIS, NATO, the United States, Israel, these are the people who are pushing us toward nuclear war, not the countries that are acting in self-defense. But we have to acknowledge the situation that when you have two nuclear-armed powers engaging in conflict on opposite sides with one another on the same field, in the same general area, there is the potential for conflict. So, after Lavrov made his statement, we had ISIS Czar General John Allen, and I guess maybe, can we say former yet? former ISIS czar. That sounds nice, but maybe we shouldn't say it just yet. Allen, in an interview with Jake Tapper of CNN, is fawning worship that Jake Tapper provided Allen. I'm sure he enjoyed that, the megalomaniac that he is. And he was asked by Jake Tapper basically what he thinks of the Russian involvement in Syria. And this is what Allen says. Bashar al-Assad is singularly responsible for the death of tens of thousands of his people. Vomit. Much of the instability in the region is a direct result of the actions of Bashar al-Assad. Vomit. And to prop him up with military force creates an additional crisis in the region. Vomit. Again, but here's the important part of what he says. And in fact, could bring Russian forces in confrontation with coalition forces that are fighting Daesh in Syria. Let me reread that without my commentary. Bashar al-Assad is singularly responsible for the death of tens of thousands of his people. Much of the instability in the region is a direct result of the actions of Bashar al-Assad, and to prop him up with military force creates an additional crisis in the region, and in fact could bring Russian forces in confrontation with coalition forces that are fighting Daesh in Syria. Now notice that what Allen said amidst the absurd and ridiculous claims that fighting in the Middle East is Assad's fault, he says that Russian involvement in Syria could bring Russian forces in confrontation with coalition forces. Now, his rhetoric is not only disingenuous, it's dangerous. And it also went largely unreported in the media in contrast to what Lavrov had to say. And Lavrov's statements were much more calm and collected. All right, we're going to have to continue this next week, unfortunately, because I'm running out of time, and I really wanted to get to this confrontation. Maybe we won't comment on the GOP debate so much. We do want to talk about these people because elections will be coming up in a few months. Carly Fiorina, of course, we've got some information on Carly, and we'll be talking about what she is soon. She's basically a CIA asset. She's worked with the CIA closely as a consultant. This is why this crazy, insane woman wants World War III. We'll deal with Carly next week. We'll also talk more about the Syrian situation, the geopolitical situation, and get prepared for a call to action. Get your ducks in a row. We will soon be calling for action. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.